Hello, my name is Corinna. Welcome to Beginner's Ear, where we get to take an hour out of our day to indulge in a little mental clarity and beautiful music. Now, I say indulge. I know that for some people, the idea of meditation can actually engender its very own brand of anxiety and fear of failure. I certainly often hear people say, I know I really need to meditate, but I just can't empty my mind. And I want to offer you maybe just one thought on that in a moment that might be helpful. But first of all, I just wanted to extend my gratitude to WQXR for making this series possible, to the Jerome L. Green Foundation for their support, and also once again to Steinway for this beautiful piano today. And I'm thrilled to have three wonderful musicians playing today with Anthony McGill, Amadi Azikiwe, and Kyle Walker. And I'm grateful to have Kien Chu in charge of the meditation today. So the idea of meditation being about emptiness is, I think, one of the most common misperceptions about meditation. It's not so much that the goal of practice is to either empty our minds or even reduce the amount of impulses that come into it in a given minute or sit. But it's more to practice a certain attitude towards them that allows thoughts and impulses to come into our field of awareness and then also move through it and move out of it again. So it's maybe more fluidity that we're after than emptiness. And that's where I've found that music can be such a powerful teacher, because in the coming into being of sounds and the way that they change and then move on, Music can really model for us a way to be with our minds that can be really delicious. So I'm going to hand over to Kien in just a second. He's going to lead us in a guided mindfulness practice for about 10 minutes. And then out of the resulting, hopefully lovely, deep stillness, the music of Amadi, Anthony, and Kyle will just emerge and unfold. And then at the end, you will hear just one chime, and that'll be our signal to reconnect over a little bit of Q&A and conversation. If you haven't done so already, I invite you to just make sure that your cell phones are off, maybe give them a power nap, and I'll see you on the other side. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Corinna. Establishing a comfortable seat, and begin by listening. Listening to the full sound of the bell as it permeates your entire being into stillness. As the sound fades into silence, arrive in this moment with 3 full breaths together. Breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Breathing in, breathing out. In, out. Allowing now your eyes to close and rest deep in their sockets, while the attention draws inwards towards the dark caverns of the mind. Within this darkness, and for a moment into the hour, let all your thoughts of agendas and responsibility to settle. And allowing it now to pour through the body and descend upon your feet. From this root, supported by the holding of the earth, let your legs and the entire torso settle and rest deeply into your seat. Allowing now the hands and all the fingers to unfold, bathing in the warmth of awareness. As the palms pulsates with sensations of light, and breathe. with each breath, and the light in your palms. Allow it to expand up your arms, caressing the shoulders in alignment over the hips. Continue this ascension of light to soften the throat as the tongue settles down and back. And the jaw releases into spaciousness. Encouraging the head to balance with ease over the shoulders, neck, and hips. And breathe. In this co-created space of awareness and light, listen. Listen to its permeating sound of silence. And the inner silence between each breath, sensations, or thought. This quieting of being that is revealed through the act of listening, to begin again and again. An orchestra of infinite potentiality in the here and now. Continue to meditate upon this sound of silence as you rest and listen with beginner's ears to each breath, sensations, or thought. the sound of the bell. Let the silence slowly emerge, flowering your ears towards presence and receptivity.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the musicians. Thank you to everyone in the audience for making space for all these beautiful sounds and this gorgeous music. You've given us such an interesting program to hone our ears on, both in terms of the very different sound colors of the three instruments that we had, with the clarinet, the viola, and piano, sort of each with their own sound profile, and especially the very first notes coming out of the silence by the clarinet that has this unique quality of just kind of sneaking up on you, I think. It has like this way of making the air vibrate in a way that by the time we realize it's sound, it's actually been there already for a few fractions of a second. And Anthony, I'd love to hear from you just a little bit about the piece that you chose to play, which I know has its own special history in terms of how it was probably listened to when it was first heard. And maybe if you can just give us also just your impressions of what it was like playing into that silence or out of that silence.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here, everybody. And it's amazing, actually, to play, first of all, having been on the stage when we began already for quite a few minutes, and then try to get in a space where it feels like I'm ready to perform. A lot of times as performers, we actually spend a lot of the time backstage preparing ourselves mentally to perform, and to actually already be sitting up here with you as we were beginning a meditation. I realized I had never done this before. And so some things that we do as performers, we practice doing the thing before, mentally. So to hear the bell and then to just play the note was actually really interesting. At first, I was thinking it was going to be extremely difficult. And then, I played the first note and then it came out. So I was like, okay, that's, because the clarinet is a reed instrument. And so we're thinking about all these kind of strange things like this. So that was the first thing that was kind of fascinating about it. But the piece itself is a masterwork. It's about an hour long. And this is the third piece. It's a solo clarinet movement, but it's a chamber work that Messiaen wrote while he was in a camp during World War II, around that time. And he found a couple instruments and started writing a few different pieces, one for the solo clarinet, then he had 2 or 3 instruments, around this camp, and gave performances of this at the camp. And so that, of course, has a lot of meaning, but he was really into the sounds of nature, the sounds of birds, and the sound of this sort of thing. So his music is very natural, but also kind of supernatural. He was a very devout religious person. And so in this music, you can kind of be here with it, but also it can take you many places. And in that movement, and in the solo movements in particular, they're duo movements with violin and piano and cello and piano. Some of the most beautiful music ever written, because he just transport you. So while I was playing that movement, especially in some of the softer, slower, lower parts of the piece, as the piece went on, especially I tried to dive into, like you said, that the sound actually has a world of its own, kind of, in the air making that sound. And I guess I'm blowing through the clarinet, but the sound itself exists as you play it. And so for a couple moments in there, I was in the sound as maybe you were as well, trying to listen to it as an observer. And that's an interesting moment where you get to take yourself away from yourself as a performer with all of your thoughts and all of your, thinking, and actually be with the sound kind of present for it as it happens, which is really interesting. It doesn't happen very often, but if it happens for 1 second, you kind of experience the sound as a performer, and then you get out of your head, and then it passes,
Yeah, and I mean also in that movement there are so many gaps in between the notes, right? So that the silence actually is very much part of the piece, and I thought the conditions here. I mean, I've heard that piece played in normal concert settings, and to me that was really extraordinary. Just having the gaps in between the notes almost develop their own life as well, and just being reminded of how much music is about framing silence, I think. And Amadi, like your movement from a sonata for solo viola by Hindemith, a similar time period as the Messiaen, right? Late 1930s?
1937, that's
yeah.
right.
So that's also, I mean, it's sort of that sense of a soliloquy in silence, right? Can you like talk a little bit about like how you approach that as a performer to make it sound like sort of move between abstraction and then sort of searching for something expressive?
Well, I would like to first say that it's probably one of the more user-friendly pieces, this sonata, because when we think of Hindemith, you don't always think of, lyricism, tonality, because he was experimenting, including with this piece. But it has always struck me how much he could put into so little time. For instance, the pizzicato portion. I mean, how do you think of that? Like, why did you? And but it strikes me as being a very spiritual, sort of a mysterious little part of a story. And if you ever were to look at the sheet music for that sonata, automatically there's a disclaimer that Hindemith did not write this piece while on a train between New York and Chicago, saying that he needed more music for his next concert. But I think there's some truth to that. Otherwise, it's... So he was a very spontaneous person and able to write in all different styles. So for me to embrace that is... He also wrote film music. Most people don't know that. I didn't know that until recently. But to kind of join him in embracing all the spontaneity, the things that he was experimenting with, because this doesn't sound like any other of his sonatas or any other Hindemith that I know. So it's a great joy to share that and I like the word you used, Anthony, climb into. So it doesn't feel like anything other than pure expression, and to be able to meditate before that is so what I would want. That's the second movement, and you can't do that before you play it in concert because you've just played the first movement. But if I could, I would. So this is ideal. It really is, for selfish reasons as well.
Well,
So
I think
you.
we can share in that selfishness all too. So from the music of nature and spirituality through the sort of spontaneity, we then landed with you, Kyle, on something that was so specific in how it referenced something in the outside world, in the world of society, even politics, right? So that was Beethoven's take on what was then God Save the King. But I mean, it was such an interesting choice for you to give us that into this container of meditative listening, because I don't know how you felt, but it really pulls you out of being able to approach things as just sound, and there's so much more than just sound, right? Can you tell us a little bit about your choices and how that felt playing it?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, especially in this space, being that we're right off of Varick Street here, and we just see all the hustle and bustle in the middle of a workday. And one of the interesting things about this piece is that Beethoven starts with, obviously, the theme, which we all know and love, or maybe some of us love it, maybe some of us don't, but, it comes with its kind of own natural baggage along with the theme. And the first variation sort of reflects on the theme, more or less, and it becomes almost dreamy. So we're sort of listening very closely to the music in the first variation, But as soon as the second variation starts, there's all of a sudden lots of activity happening, lots of contrapuntal activity between two of the hands at the same time. So we all of a sudden have to be very present with the sound simply because there's so much activity starting, and especially coming out of the Hendem and the Messiaen, there hasn't been as much contrapuntal activity, not only because of the nature of those instruments, but also because of the nature of the music in and of itself. So I think because of that, we have to be drawn into the music, even without thinking about the political aspects of the music itself. And that's a whole nother layer on top of the musicality in and of a sense. So yeah, I mean, everybody comes with their own preconceived idea. I know the first time I heard this piece, I was in preschool. I mean, and I remember that very specifically because we would put our right hand over our heart to say the Pledge of Allegiance. Not that this is the national anthem of the U.S., but, you know, My Country 'Tis of Thee, a very patriotic song in the U.S. I would put my hand over my heart, or actually I would do it this way. And the preschool teacher would always come by and fix your hand, because you're not supposed to put your left hand over your heart. It has to be your right hand over your heart. And so for that very specific reason, I have my own sort of personal baggage that comes with this piece. And when we have an environment where everybody is sort of in this trance before we begin, suddenly we're way more sort of reflective of what it is we're actually trying to do with this music. And that has to do with also things such as the time between the variations. You know, how much should it shift and how abruptly should it shift characters? It's also interesting, some of the variations, when you think about like what Beethoven was kind of going through when he wrote these variations on God Save the King. I think about the march. Bum ba 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 bum ba bum ba ba. That's obviously very militaristic in a sense. But then we have, or right before that, we have the one in minor, and it's obviously very slow and not dreamy, but very romantic in sort of comparison to the ones that came right before it, which again are those contrapuntal activity ones. And yeah, it's just so interesting to sort of take the journey with Beethoven, but also relate it directly to what we're going through in our society, in our time. Yeah, it's really, really interesting to go through this process with an audience with me along the journey.
Yeah. And I mean, I thought it was also listening to it inside of the context of meditation. It seemed to tie in nicely with the idea that the thought itself is a really neutral thing. It's not a good or bad or patriotic or pathetic or an aggressive thing. It's more like the stories we tell about it. And with each variation, you were kind of reminded of the innocence of the theme itself. Like the theme is just the theme. What you make with it, right, then gives it militaristic colors or something really melancholic, or and so that was sort of interesting how like the music again kind of models that it just is, and then yet of course like we don't allow it to just be, like we make up all these connotations and give it so much power and significance with the stories that we tell. Yeah, and then they ended with Bruch, just one movement. From pieces that really were written for these three instruments together, and it was just such a beautiful way of you coming together and giving us something that was so rich in emotion and texture, and it was kind of, I thought, fun to try and pick out the individual voices as we'd gotten to know them in your solo pieces when you were all blended together. Is there just one, maybe in conclusion, a comment or a question from somebody in the room that you would like to share or ask? I know that we're kind of coming to the end of our time together. We do have microphones if somebody wants to even just share a thought or an expression. We had one event similar to this in the fall that had those three instruments, and there was somebody in the audience who had this incredibly beautiful comment that I just want to share with you. It comes from a listener back then, but she was reminded, listening to clarinet, viola, and piano playing together, of a time when she remembered sailing at night, approaching the shore, and she said it was like the three qualities of black. So there was like the black of the sky, there was the black of the dark water, and then there was the black of the land that they were approaching, and how like these different colors were like textures were all in the music. And I just like ever since she'd said that, when I hear this combination of viola, clarinet and piano, like I'm reminded of that, and that sort of the way that colors can come to life when we close our eyes and listen with all our other senses. So yeah, thank you again, once again. Maybe we can just give a round of applause to our